Hello and welcome to BizTalk, Reform Agenda and Global Implications. I'm Guan in Beijing, and today we're delving into the outcomes of China's recent third plenum, a significant event that shapes the country's policy direction for the future. By adopting a reform resolution and mapping out more than 300 reform initiatives, China is presenting a comprehensive reform agenda to advance Chinese modernization. These reform initiatives are set to play a pivotal role in shaping the future economic landscape, both within its borders and internationally. To help us understand the broad implications of these reforms, both for China and the global economy, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Mr. John Ross, Senior Fellow at the Chongyang Institute of Financial Studies, Renmin University, and former Director of the Department of Economic and Business Policy in London. Welcome. And Professor Warwick Powell, Adjunct Professor at the Queensland University of Technology and Senior Fellow at Taihe Institute. And Mr. Maximilian Butek, Executive Director and Board Member of the German Chamber of Commerce in China, East China. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So, Mr. Butek, I want to start with you because businesses usually get an early and first-hand sense of economic climate. How do you view the current economic outlook for China in light of recent policy signals?
Thank you for having me. When we asked our company, these 38% said the economy will be improving, while 46% said it will be unchanged. So we can talk here about a cautious optimism, which is quite relevant not only for all our business, but especially for German business focusing so much on investment goods.
So, Mr. Ross, I know you are very familiar with China's policy making. The communique laid out a very comprehensive blueprint, but they are not short-term solutions. In your opinion, what are the short-term and long-term implications for Chinese economy as a result of these decisions?
Well, the most important one is to maintain the present rate of growth of around 5%. Because if you look at the longer-term projection, the integration of the longer-term projection, at the time of the adoption of the present five-year plan, the position was adopted that there was not an obstacle, is the way that it put, to the doubling of China's per capita GDP between 2020 and 2035. Well, that means you would have to hit during that period average 4.7% growth a year. China's come in a bit above that, at 5%, so it's a bit ahead of the target. I think that sometimes the West doesn't pay attention to what China actually says because they can project whatever they want about the growth rate. But what is important for China is what sort of growth rate the Chinese government projects. So it's going at about 4% and around 5% at the present time, so it's a bit ahead of the 4.7%. Obviously, the medium-term challenge is to keep this going to 2035 because the character of Chinese economy will have completely changed or radically changed by then. In 2020, China was still an upper middle income economy. By 2035, China will be, by international standards, not merely a high income economy and by far the biggest high income economy in the world, with a bigger population than all the other high income economies in the world put together, but it won't even be at the bottom of the level. Just making a high-income economy. It'll be in the middle of the ranks of high-income economies. And that's a much more complicated, much more sophisticated, much more high-tech, much more high-productivity economy. So that's the medium-term challenge.
Indeed, the developing Chinese economy have far-reaching implications for the world. Professor Powell, I know you have extensive knowledge of global economy and trade dynamics. What do you make of the impact of the third plenum outcomes?
I think the main things are, in terms of the international economy, is a continued focus on interacting with overseas partners. And that's going to take place in a number of dimensions. One is a continued expansion of trade. And we're starting to see what that looks like in terms of the configuration or the composition of trade. And there's a couple of dimensions here. One is that China itself is, in terms of its manufactures, moving up the value-added curve. And in terms of the countries that it's trading with, increasingly the trade that it's undertaking is with partners in the Belt and Road countries and also in the global south or the global majority countries. So there is a change in the contours of trade. Similarly, we're going to see the same when it comes to China's role as a global exporter of capital. And we're starting to see that as well in a range of downstream value-added arenas, such as in minerals processing, steel fabrication, and of course, in the establishment of manufacturing capabilities in electric vehicles and solar PV technologies in various countries around the world. So that's the second dimension. The third dimension is going to be in the export of know-how, and that's going to sit in behind the export of fixed capital as well as money capital to build these factories around the world and to enable other countries to begin their own journeys of economic development. So from an external point of view, China will continue to expand its role as a great enabler of economic development and a smoother process of even economic development at a global scale.
Indeed, and the third plenum described opening up as a defining feature of Chinese modernization. So let me turn to Mr. Butek now. From the standpoint of German businesses operating in China, what new opportunities do you see arising as a result of the signals recently released?
Yeah, I believe we were all quite exciting about these signals when it came to further move into market openness. That's especially in the manufacturing sector, which is one big topic of us. So we understand now the guidance of the central government level, but now we really need to see how it is translated into concrete measures on the provincial and the city level, because I believe we can contribute a lot to all these topics which are mentioned. We are more than happy to contribute to the modernization and the transformation of the economy, of the industry. We can supply high quality products, we offer reliable service, etc. But therefore we need concrete measures, and I think it's time to receive those.
Indeed, how these policies unfolding is very important for businesses both at home and abroad. And Mr. Ross, how do you make of this high level opening up? And this approach contrasts with the rising protectionist measures we're seeing in many countries. What impact do you see as China continue to open up and some countries are turning inwardly?
I think the world is broadly divided into two camps, with at the present time some countries and regions, particularly in Europe, not quite sure which one they're going to go into. The one which is clear is the United States is turning in on itself. It's already introduced a series of tariffs, technology sanctions, etc. And of course, if Trump follows through, if Trump is elected and follows through with his proposal for a 10% across the board tariff on all countries' imports into the United States, that will then solidify and codify that. Then you have, on the other hand, China and the global south countries, which don't want to turn away from globalization at all, because they're doing very well out of it. Not merely is China is, of course, the most spectacular case of growth, but it's not the only one. And there are other large economies growing very fast, which is India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Turkey, have all been growing very fast. So they have no interest, whatever, in turning away from globalization, because they're all benefiting from it. Then Europe is sort of a bit caught, it's not quite sure what to do at the moment. On the one hand, its economic interests would be to continue with opening up and its relations with China. On the other hand, it's coming under political pressure from the United States to carry out tariffs, carry out sanctions, etc., which are against Europe's economic interests, but it's been acting against its interests. I mean, for example, the cutting out of Huawei from the telecommunication systems in Britain and other countries makes 5G more expensive and delivered later. So it's against their interests, but they've done it. So therefore, China and the global south are continuing with globalization going forward. The US is turning into protectionism, and in Europe, a bit of a battle is going on about which of these two is going to choose. That's the way I would see the situation.
Here on Biz Talk, we connect the dots, shedding light on the real stories behind the economic landscape. To better understand China's dynamism and the economies and rhythms of business, propelling new drivers of growth.
China.
Biz Talk, your window into China and the global economy. Only on Biz Talk.
And Professor Powell, what is your opinion on this? Some people say that China also need to de-risk.
The main thing that China is focused upon is actually to deepen the extent to which it interacts with the rest of the world. And that means being a leader in crafting the institutions that will create the rules and the protocols by which parties around the world will interact with each other and do so in a fair and equitable basis. It's also supporting a transition to a payments infrastructure that will reduce the risks of capricious censorship by the United States in particular through its weaponization of the SWIFT messaging platform, and again in that process be a great enabler of national sovereignty for developing nations and enable them to progressively develop value-adding capabilities within their own economies. So I think China's way of de-risking, so to speak, is actually to stay on the front foot. So rather than retreating, as the United States seems to be wanting to do, China's approach is to actually engage deeper and participate more deeply in the economic development of its partners and contribute to the overall improvement of living standards around the world.
And there are still a lot of potential to explore, to engage more with global south, emerging markets, as well as some traditional markets. Mr. Butek, China has placed a significant emphasis on technology and innovation in driving future growth. In your opinion, how can China and German businesses to forge new areas of collaboration going forward?
German companies are very committed to the innovation scheme we find here in China. This is not only because there is a lot of subsidies for innovation, but you find the right talents here, you find good infrastructure, etc. And John made it quite clear that Europe is still in a phase to find its role in this, and I agree. So we need to create more trust that we fully commit to the innovation system here, which will be necessary also for the competitiveness of German companies in global markets, especially, and the two gentlemen also talked about that, when it comes to the global south. So we are quite optimistic using China as an innovation hub, but we need to create more measures on mutual trust.
Well, the focus on new quality productive forces is crucial as the country aims to boost innovation and achieve self-sufficiency in technology, particularly in light of U.S. containment of China's technology sector. Mr. Ross, in your opinion, how will this strategy unfolding in light of the rising competition in the tech sector and the lack of trust in some certain high-end sectors?
Well, the situation is in the short term, of course, the United States with its technology tariffs can cause some problems. But the problem that the United States has got is that innovation is not just a question of having good ideas. I think there's no difference in the intelligence between American scientists and researchers and Chinese researchers and scientists. But the difference is that China has got colossally greater resources to invest in emerging new industries. If you take total capital creation in the United States and in China, it's around $4 trillion in the United States, and it's $8 trillion in China. So that means that when a Chinese researcher comes up with a good idea and innovation, they've got twice as much capital in order to back this up as an American researcher. And there's a slight misunderstanding about innovation. It's not just about having good ideas. If you just have a good idea, it doesn't really change things greatly. I mean, if you take the internet, for example, what makes the internet so revolutionary was not merely that it was a very good idea or innovation, but there was an enormous network of computers, telecommunications, power supplies, etc., necessary for it. And this is the problem that the United States has got. Because of the priorities it took on having an extremely inefficient health service, on having a huge amount of spending on the military, etc., it just doesn't have the investment resources to turn innovation into development. I don't mean by that individual American companies are world leading. They certainly are. But overall, China has just got much greater resources to back up its innovation than the United States has.
And Professor Powell, how do you make of China's innovation capabilities and its role in driving China's future growth?
Look, innovation is at the heart of this process of transformation that's taking place now. Over the last 40 years, we've seen China continually demonstrate its ability to innovate at all levels, actually. And it does that by having an experimental attitude to solving problems. It doesn't have a dogmatic approach. It tackles problems on their face value, and it commits resources to create an ecosystem of skilled people together with the right kinds of tools and technologies and know-how that enables solutions to be imagined and ultimately fine-tuned and brought to market. The other important thing to bear in mind about this innovation landscape is that China has a very strong track record of embedding innovation across the social and economic systems. So in many regards, it's not just a question of who has the individually leading pieces of technology. It's the extent to which different technologies can be embedded in workflows and social practices to achieve the kinds of efficiencies and beneficial outcomes that we're seeking. So in many regards, China is a global leader insofar as it is a technology society, as opposed to being a mere technology innovator. And I think that that lays the foundations for a robust and sustained period of innovation-driven transformation and growth.
Okay, so let's turn to the business environment, because the communique stated to build a high standard socialist market economy, it needs to build a fairer and more dynamic market environment. So Mr. Butek, from the perspective of foreign businesses in China, what improvement of business environment do you think are the most important?
The major challenge currently for our German companies, besides being in such a competitive market environment, is the global economic slowdown and the slowdown in the Chinese market. So we really expect that also on the short term that the Chinese leadership can do something to boost the economy, that we do not have to wait another 3 to 4 years. We believe that if concrete measures will be announced how to stabilize the economy, this will be quite an improvement.
And data in China has said it aims to pursue reform through continued opening up. And Mr. Ross, what specific changes do you expect to see in China's evolving business landscape, and what impact would that have on both the private sector and foreign businesses in China?
Well, there's two questions. For me, the most fundamental question, which is not discussed enough in China, is the question of the profitability situation of companies. I think there has been a confused discussion about the role of consumption in the economy, which is not the factual results are very simple. The higher is the proportion of the consumption in the economy, the slower consumption will grow. It's simple. So this discussion has diverted attention from another more serious question, which is the profitability of companies, because the profitability of companies has not gone up greatly in the last 5 years, and that explains many phenomena in the economy: the poor performance in the stock market, the relatively slow growth of private investment, etc. And that, in my opinion, is the single biggest issue that's got to be addressed. I saw recently there was a move to reduce interest rates. I think that's very good, and there are other measures that have got to be done. So that's the first immediate one. The longer term one is the following: China's continuing to devote a higher and higher proportion of its economy to R&D. In absolute terms, it's approaching the same level as the United States, but it's still got to give the investment resources in order to continue to invest this, as I say, in real products. For example, green technology, which China has become a world leader. It's not just that China had good research and development in green technology, it certainly did, but this was huge investments in solar panels, wind power, batteries, and things of this type. So it's how to continue to maintain the integration between the high level of R&D and its investment in the real economy that's the key medium, longer term aspect of the situation.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
And Mr. Powell, in your opinion, regarding business environments, what new changes do you think are the most important?
The most significant changes that are going to unfold over the next 5 years or so is going to go to the heart of creating a consolidated, integrated single national market. As the previous speaker noted, a lot of the challenges over time have related to how broad national visions ultimately are translated through to city and provincial level regimes. And the move towards an integrated national market will actually reduce the transaction costs and the confusions, if you will, that arises when there are different approaches from one part of the country to another. That in and of itself is likely to make life substantially easier for business decision makers as they seek to make decisions concerning market entry, new product launches, and things like that. The other thing to bear in mind is that on the question of the domestic consumption, the fact of the matter is that consumption has actually grown substantially in the last 6 months, and in fact over the last 10 plus years. So we actually have a national economic system that has developed substantial household consumption growth that has absorbed the vast majority of new output growth. The fact that we also have strong exports is a function of domestic supply chains that are creating incredibly efficient, low-cost outputs coupled with intense domestic competition that is enabling the world to benefit from price levels whereby people are now being priced in, as opposed to the experiences that they've had in the past, which is being priced out by virtue of economic models that have been based on confected scarcity.
Indeed, and China can further leverage in its unified national market and its consumption to further attract foreign investment. Mr. Butek, let me turn to you. What are your final thoughts on China's reform agenda and its implications for the future landscape for foreign investment in China?
I believe that China will remain one of the biggest growth market and most important market for many German companies. And I don't expect that many German companies will withdraw from the market. I think it's a clear sign that the framework in China also has to change, and that the opening up reforms really need to come up now with concrete measures which create fair treatment between foreign and Chinese companies, but also solve the high competition we are finding in the market, that the competition remains fair, as we think that the Chinese companies are now mature enough that they don't need that protection anymore, so that we can have a real level playing field.
I think with more than 300 reform initiatives, China is committed to continuous advance its reforms and improve the business environment. And Mr. Ross, what is your overall assessment of China's reform outlook, and what specific reform do you believe that has the greatest potential of boosting the economy?
Well, I think that there's not, as regards the potential, something completely historic is going to happen, which is in about 2 years' time, depending a little bit on the exchange rate fluctuations, China is going to become a World Bank, a high-income economy by World Bank standards. But China's got more people in it than all the existing high-income economies in the world put together. So this is a completely extraordinary transformation of the international situation. The biggest challenge within that is going to be that this economy is therefore going to become very much more sophisticated. The expectations of the population become much higher. All the problems, having a roof over your head or having enough food and things like that have been solved. People want education, foreign holidays, culture, shorter working hours, all sorts of, complicated things. And the economy's got to continue to generate development under those processes. But the key to this will continue to be the scientific R&D of situation, because that's the only way to innovate. Innovate doesn't come some isolated genius sitting in a garret somewhere. It comes from big research and development expenditures, and then how to have the investment resources to embed that in real new high quality, high technology industry. That's the key ongoing challenge.
And Mr. Powell, what are your final thoughts on China's reform outlook, and what are the top priorities as China continue to advance reforms?
Look, one of the features that's rarely talked about is the transformation of the economic structure. And with that is also the transformation of the ways in which credit works within the Chinese economy and the continual evolution of capital markets. I think they're actually going to be very, very important parts of the ongoing reforms. In terms of the capital markets, we're starting to see the maturation of a whole range of cross-border relationships between Chinese capital markets and those of places in West Asia, for example, Saudi Arabia and such like. In terms of the domestic credit marketplace, what we've seen over the last 10 years is actually a progressive transformation from significant credit growth into the residential property market to substantial credit growth into the industrial sector. Now, the extent to which credit growth can deliver the outputs and the productivity gains that we're looking to see as part of this ongoing process of innovation-led growth will depend upon a combination of things. One is the ongoing availability of a highly skilled workforce. Secondly, the ability for supply chains to become more finely tuned through the application of big data and AI in particular, as well as clustering. And finally, through the ongoing innovation of the design of new products to drive heightened consumer interest. So I think we're going to see ongoing reforms to the capital markets and to the ways in which credit growth is used to steer the restructuring of the Chinese economy overall.
Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today. Many thanks again to our distinguished guests, John Ross, Senior Fellow at Chongyang Institute of Financial Studies at Renmin University of China, Professor Warwick Powell from the Queensland University of Technology, and Maximilian Butek, Executive Director and Board Member of the German Chamber of Commerce in China, East China. As we wrap up this discussion on China's reform agenda and its global implications, it's clear that the outcomes of the third plenum provide an important window into China's economic policy making. And moving forward, it will be crucial to monitor how these reform initiatives unfold and their impact on both domestic and international fronts. And we look forward to continuing this dialogue and further exploring the evolving landscape of China's modernization drive. I'm Guan in Beijing. Thank you for being with us. See you next time.